So trying to stay on the ball over here on the NA version of the game, we have Kiara going up on rate up when this video should be out. Again, as long as I schedule these videos at the right time and I stay on top of the ball, these videos should be going out the day when the servants come out. So you can watch this video in the morning. Hopefully it's early enough that nobody decides to summon on the banner, and then they can kind of get their 2 cents as to whether or not they do want to summon for that specific servant. And in today's video, or I guess today's rate up, you have Kiara going up on the NA version of the game, and this one is a really difficult one for me to tell people to not summon for, because Kiara is absolutely amazing. I think I used her for like the majority, if not every single one of the boss battles in the Koyanskaya event, and a lot of those boss battles were not easy or were very annoying, but Kiara made them significantly easier, because she's got to be one of the best boss killing servants in the game, even as an AoE servant. Just the way that her kit is built and the way that she functions when it comes to more difficult content, she's just gotta be the queen of that hard, difficult content. Now, the only issue with Kiara is that you've probably heard this a lot if you've just been in the FGO community for any amount of time. Her NP1 damage is pretty poo-poo stinky. Thankfully, with the new rerun for the Oko event, they do give her an MP upgrade, which literally all they do is buff up the damage. And I think they increased the heal, but nobody really cared about that. And so it makes her NP1 damage a bit more salvageable, but you still really want to get her to NP2, because as soon as you get her to NP2, she actually just becomes a menace to society. And it becomes even easier to run her in like single target situations. But we're going to talk about her in today's video. If you guys can't tell, I'm a huge proponent of Kiara. I absolutely love using her, and I think she's absolutely phenomenal. So just get ready for some propaganda in this video. Now, before we begin, if you have not already, please leave a like on the video and subscribe to the channel. It would greatly help me out a lot. And it's a free way to show your support for the channel, as your boy is on that daily FGO content grind. But if you want another free way to support the channel, down in the description down below, you'll see that I'm affiliated by all means with LD Emulator and Loot Cakes. And the #1 question I always get is, will FGO ban your account if you go on an emulator? And absolutely not. FGO is pretty tolerable when it comes to running things on emulators. Just be careful that you don't transfer an iOS account to the LD Emulator, because LD Emulator is an Android service. And I'm sure a lot of you guys know this, but if you don't know, if you try to transfer Saint Quartz from a different OS over to the other OS, it will delete all of your Saint Quartz. I have no idea why they do that. I'm just going to assume that Apple and the Google Play Store are both just being incredibly petty towards one another, because I'm sure they could get it done, but you know, I'm just assuming it's pettiness between companies. But regardless, if you're going to transfer over and you have an iOS device, make sure you do when you have 0 Saint Quartz, so you don't get all of your Saint Quartz deleted. But it's also a really good way to go ahead and open up a JP account. If you don't want to play JP on your phone, you can just open it on the emulator, play it on your computer, and it just makes for a fun time overall. And then finally, if you want more content from me, well, I stream every weekday over on the Twitch, link down in the description down below. And if you click that join button, you can get channel member exclusive content as well. Now, with all that being said, let's go ahead and hop right into this video, starting off with Kiara's hits, which the only thing you really care about with Kiara are the arts cards. You're really not doing anything with her face cards at all. Like, her quick card is okay, I guess. It's got 3 hits on it with 10% star gen. That's passable, that's fine, nothing too crazy there. And I mean, her buster cards have 1 hits on them each. You could try to use them for crits with her 3rd skill, but trying to use Kiara as a crit servant really doesn't work out all that well, and you should maybe just accept it as a little bit of bonus chip damage here and there. The main thing you're going to be doing with her is NP spamming, and the way you want to do that is by clicking those arts cards whenever you can. Now, unfortunately, because she only has 0.55% NP gen and 3 hits on the 2 arts cards, she's really reliant on getting crits on said arts cards, but she really has no way to front stars, or like even any measure of just star weight at all whatsoever. So while you do want to be doing arts chains and preferably getting crits on the arts cards to really help out her ability to refund her NP, that's really not going to be an option most of the time, because she's not really, again, a crit servant. Thankfully, Kiara has a pretty broken ability with her 1st skill that I guess we'll just hop into right now, that really just kind of fixes a lot of her issues when it comes to genning NP, because skill 1 is a 50% battery that neuters one enemy's debuff resistance by 100% for 1 turn, and then smacks them with a 30% arts resistance down debuff for 1 turn as well, all on a 6-turn cooldown. And you guys better pray to DW that they do this for more skills, because they actually reduced the skill cooldown on this one, as they did one of her other skills as well. And it greatly helped out Kiara's efficiency, because not only have they buffed 2 of her skills, but they also reduced 2 of their cooldowns from 7 to 6. So so it makes her an even more efficient boss killer. And essentially, how this skill is supposed to function is, say you're using Kiara in a boss fight where there's numerous enemies, where you're supposed to slap this on the boss to lower their arts resistance, so when you smack them with the NP that you just got a 50% battery for, they'll take more damage than the side enemies, you know, the trash mobs that you probably won't need the arts debuff to actually kill. Because usually those side mobs have like 50k HP, maybe upwards of even 100k, but even at that point, if your Kiara's NP1, you can still probably two-shot them, and it's more worth to actually slap this on the main boss, who usually has way more HP than the trash mobs, and it just cuts down on the amount of NPs you actually need to use against them. I will say before we actually go any further, this is why Kiara does pair very well with Tamamo, because you have a skill like this that's really strong, but it's on a 6-turn cooldown, but Tamamo, her whole thing is reducing skill cooldown. So if you bring her along for the ride, not only does her NP give Kiara extra NP whenever she fires it, but it also lowers her skill cooldown so she can get back to these good skills as soon as possible. She also gives Kiara buffs that she doesn't give herself. Like, Kiara just doesn't have an arts buff, she doesn't have an NP damage buff, so she actually hits way harder if you want to pair her with Tamamo. And funnily enough, because Tamamo focuses on reducing NP gauge, Kiara's second skill, which reduces all enemies' NP gauge by 1, actually gives them really good synergy, because it gives you pretty much just ultimate NP control of the entire enemy party. So as long as you manage your skills and NPs properly, you should never have to really worry about them blasting you with an NP unless they have like a break bar and they automatically fire an NP or something. But again, that's already a really strong start to her second skill. Then she removes all the enemy's buffs, which is absolutely just stupid nutty broken. Anytime a servant just has this free buff removal on the entire enemy party, or even just for one enemy, I always harp on it because it's so disgustingly good. Because it means anything from invincibility, solemn defense, a big attack buff, a crit damage buff, debuff immunity. She literally just rips all of that off of them and says, you're now naked, let me smack you with this big planet NP that I cannot describe any further for, you know, particular reasons of being here on YouTube, but you guys know the NP, you already know what she's smacking them with. And then, if not to just end off the skill on a high note, she also reduces all of their defense by 30% for 3 turns, which usually when you lower all enemies' defense, it's more likely going to be like a 20% debuff, but she reduces it by 30%, so she's greatly gassing up her damage. You could almost look at this as like Kiara's charisma almost, if you want to look at it that way, where instead of buffing the attack for the entire party, she lowers the defense of the entire enemy party. You can kind of look at it that way if you really wanted to, but it just means that like already Kiara's doing a bunch of nutty things. The fact that she has party-wide NP control, a party-wide buff cleanse, a really strong party-wide defense debuff, a specific 30% arts resistance down for one enemy, and she charges her battery by 50%, and that one enemy is pretty much guaranteed to get smacked by all these debuffs because their resistance got lowered by 100%, just means that she's absolutely cracked between these two skills. Now, skill 3 is where things get a little wonky, but generally you're just going to use this skill for the first effect, for the invincibility. Everything else here is just kind of bonus, depending on if you need it at the time, because she gets 50% crit damage for 1 turn, which, great. The turn that you fire the invincibility, if you have a crit in the chamber, it will give her a pretty decent damage buff for that turn. But again, you don't want to use this skill specifically for the crit damage. The NP gain is really strong at 50%, but because it only lasts 1 turn, you're better off saving this skill for the invincibility than for the NP gain rate. The 50% debuff resistance, I mean, I don't gotta tell you guys that you really don't need to use this skill just for the debuff resistance. Now, the increased healing rate received is actually really interesting. If you can time this in a way where you proc this skill when you're also gonna fire your NP, it actually does result in you getting more HP back because of her NP just having an insane heal on it, plus the 50% buff to it. You actually come out here with a net positive amount of HP, so that's probably how they wanted you to use this on the turn where you can fire your NP as well, because it keeps you protected for that turn from like an enemy NP, or if you just need her to live guaranteed for 1 more turn. And then the NP gain rate and the healing rate really combo well with her NP, because even though her NP only has 3 hits, getting a 50% buff like that on already like pretty average NP gain does allow her to refund a decent bit of her NP. Not a full refund or anything crazy like that, but it does really help out her consistency for that turn if you want to use it that way. So really, all in all, that 3k demerit isn't the biggest deal, especially after they buff her NP, because until Oko comes around, her NP is not going to be buffed. But if you look at it now, I mean, just for the fact that it pierces invincibility and defense, that's already super stupid dummy cracked enough. But the overcharge gives her a 2k to 6k heal, but as soon as they rank it up, she actually gets a 5k heal at bare minimum, which means that, especially with that healing rate received buff that she's getting right there, she is more than getting all of her HP back. But let's not overshadow the main thing that her NP does. The main thing is that she literally just bypasses everything with her NP. You can't hide behind invincibility, you can't stack defense, you can't hide behind dodge, because remember that Pierce invincibility actually goes through dodges. So like the only way to live a Kiara NP is if you had like a guts up or you had solemn defense or something. But remember, Kiara has a party-wide buff cleanse where she's not just removing like the latest most debuff or something that like some of these newer units are doing. She just straight up removes all of their buffs to the entire party. She's absolutely crazy. And there is one other thing that I think is really notable about Kiara that I don't really think gets really talked about all that much. It's one of her passive skills, the Nega Saver one. It actually gives her type advantage against rulers, which is actually stupid dummy useful, right? Like I was saying, during the Koyanskaya event that just came to the JP version of the game, there were some weird nodes where it was like riders, assassins, casters, and rulers, like all these weird types mixed together. So it was like, oh man, if like Okita Alter would be good here, but now the rulers are stopping her, man. Or man, this seemed like it would be really good if to bring someone like Passionate, man, finally give these alter egos some time to shine. And then Kiara's over here just being like, oh what, y'all aren't super effective against rulers? Oh, that's crazy because I'm super effective against everything here. And so usually my main critique of the alter ego class is that it's usually better for accounts that aren't as good, because a lot of the alter ego servants are balanced around the fact that they're super effective against 3 classes and are kind of like mini berserkers. So usually they're just kind of okay. They're not usually super broken, but they're kind of balanced around the fact that, you know, you can bring them to a lot of general quests and they're very, very good for like a new player. Like Okita Alter for somebody new is like very, very useful because you can just bring her to a lot of stages and you really only got to worry about the main knight classes. But as you start getting better servants, you're like, okay, I don't need to bring her against these caster nodes anymore because I went ahead and got Da Vinci Lily. And you know, they start getting phased out as the account gets stronger and stronger. But one, because Kiara is a boss killing servant, she doesn't really get phased out for farming at all. And she's balanced around just being really good in very difficult content, which is always going to be extremely useful. But then on top of that, they were just like, let's just give her that extra layer of viability and make her super effective against rulers, so she starts encroaching on Avenger territory as well. And again, for those fights, we have the mixed nodes, and then they also like sprinkle a ruler boss or like ruler enemies in there. It just makes Kiara super invaluable. There are ways to do it, you know, if you don't have Kiara, but just having Kiara for a lot of those fights is so convenient. Because again, she's not someone like Okita Alter, who I would consider just a bit more mid. Kiara's actually insanely good. And I don't want to see that in the comments. I don't want to see anybody trying to be like, no, Okita Alter's just as good as Kiara. If you try to say that, I'm going to find you and I'm going to smack you upside the head, okay? That is not a threat, that is a promise. Anyway, should you summon for Kiara? I mean, if you can afford to try to go for NP2, I would highly recommend dumping those resources into Kiara. But that's only if you're more of like a whale or dolphin type player. I'm not going to recommend free-to-play players spend like 1,600 of their hard-earned Saint Quartz for Kiara when Castoria is right around the corner. I'm going to tell you to just save that for Castoria and then try to get Kiara later. Now, it's a bit different if you already have NP1 Kiara. If you already have a Kiara, it might be worth to try to just throw a multi or two at the banner to see if you can secure NP2. Because while she's still very good at NP1, it makes just a night and day difference once you get her to NP2 and higher. As someone on the JP version of the game who now has an NP3 Kiara, I can tell you that she most definitely is, as the kids would say, hit different. So just take all of that into account, think about that before you summon. With all that being said, I'm going to go ahead and get out of here. Leave your comments in the comments down below, and I will catch you guys in the next video. Peace, late guys.